Hi, nice to see you, Colin. Um,
Hi Charlie, how are you?
I'm good. Yeah, good to have a chance to chat again. So I know you're a very experienced negotiator in some fascinating situations and undoubtedly some very daunting situations. If you don't mind, I'm just going to ask a few questions about that, if that's okay
Of
with you.
course.
I suppose first of all. I'm curious about you. You came into this, I know, through police work. When did you kind of realize that you were actually a negotiator? Uh, when did that come into your work?
Yeah, I suppose it was almost a bit organic. I mean, I was always interested in joining the police. The diversity and the opportunity to help people was something I was always interested in. So when I joined the police many years ago now, I quickly realised that I wanted to be a detective. I liked the opportunity to investigate crime and catch the bad guys. And in particular, I enjoyed the the interview part of it, interviewing people, almost the kind of mental sparring, the psychology of it.
Right.
Now, I
Yeah.
didn't know that at the time, but on reflection, I was probably using kind of rudimental basic negotiation skills during my interviews when I was a detective. However, when I got promoted to the rank of sergeant, the opportunities to interview became less, and I was honest, I was a bit frustrated about that. And that's when a colleague of mine, who was an experienced negotiator within the police force I was in, offered me the opportunity to become a negotiator. I adopted the chance. That was back in 2006. Subsequently, passed the interview process, etc., I went to the Scottish Police College to participate in the course. And I'm not alone in saying this, but certainly for the shadow of a doubt, it was the most challenging but fully rewarding course I've ever participated on. Simply because it reflected a lot of real life, what you're likely to be exposed to
Right.
when you pass the course, and that turned out to be the case. So that was probably my kind of backstory. And then 2014, I became operational lead of the crisis unit. Then was then or is now Police Scotland, overseeing the entire kind of negotiating cabinet in Scotland, and allowed me to kind of develop myself and develop my specialism in Scotland, Europe, and kind of beyond.
So let me just focus in on that word crisis negotiation. What
Mm.
you know that covers a range of things. What's the sort of diet of crisis negotiation?
The most common instance we would be involved in is uh, suicide intervention. People who were intent on, well, can't only put it bluntly, killing themselves, again by jumping off high buildings or bridges, etc., or barricading sieges, right up to kidnaps in the UK and kidnaps overseas as well. So it was very diverse. And again, people probably don't appreciate this, and it's no great secret, but they may be surprised to know that in Scotland, when I left at the end of 19, start of 20, we were we were being called to about 450, 500 cases a year.
Wow.
So you're talking about one and a half on average a day, and that's right across the length and breadth of Scotland. Because what I found is that commanders, incident commanders from the police, found that using negotiators was a far safer way to resolve instances
Really?
with kind of minimal force or no force. So it became probably a victim of our own success because of the results that we're having to resolve instances through dialogue.
Mm.
So that was kind of the bread and butter, the diet that we have on a regular basis.
I'm curious about that safety aspect of it. Maybe to push you a wee bit further on that, yeah, no doubt you have been involved in relatively fraught situations. I'm sure that varied, but what can you tell us anything about? Um, I suppose keeping yourself safe in terms of the temperature of the negotiation. What do you think? What did you learn from having to do it when your own safety was on the line?
Yeah, probably two parts to that. I think what happened is when you're a young cop, you just think it's all about, if you don't do as you say, I'm going to arrest you and I'm just going to lock you up, right? I think I speak for most policemen. I think about that. But then as you get a bit older and wiser, particularly when you get promoted to rank as sergeant, inspector, etc., you realise that you have to justify your actions. And the reality is that you have to be nice and conscious of people's welfare, everybody's welfare. And that's when you realise that suddenly kicking doors in probably isn't the best way to resolve issues. And that's where, as for everyone concerned, and the safest way to do that is through dialogue. And in answer to your second part of your question, what did I learn? It's certainly probably the biggest thing is about listening. That's the biggest thing to take away I took from it. I think people think that being a good negotiator or a good communicator is often quite the contrary. It's about listening. And people in crisis, I can probably say without exception, when people woke up that morning, they probably didn't think that's how their day was going to pan out.
Yeah.
And then when they find themselves on the edge of a bridge or in a barricaded siege, surrounded by police, that certainly wasn't going to help the stress levels. And I certainly found as well that I think people in general, but particularly police, are really quick to problem solve and tell someone what you need to do is, or what you need to consider is, or what you're needing is. And the reality is, in my experience, people in crisis don't want to hear that because they've been around this Ferris wheel, this kind of rubber wheel themselves, basically consider all these things. And that's where this listening was important, because that's why we deploy negotiators. So it'll be the first time someone's possibly listened to this person in a very long time. They may find themselves in a very dark place. Right. Just taking that time to empathise, to listen, to actually take the time to first and foremost understand what's happened that day, why they ended up at that critical moment, and then start to understand through empathy about what's really important to them, what's their values, what's their wants, what's their needs and beliefs. Because if you start to drill down and start to understand these, you'll start to understand the person. That's where you can start to build trust, and that's where you can then, in almost all instances, reach a kind of a safe resolution without them coming to any harm.
You've just kind of, the pennies really dropped for me there, Colin, if I could put it like this. You've made me realise that when I say crisis negotiation, and you do as well, the first question is, what crisis? and that's really what you're doing, isn't it? There's 1,000 different individual personal crises, and on that given day, what listening's doing is telling you what's the particular thing that person's facing, instead of, I suppose, standardising. You're individualising.
Yeah, it's about finding out why here, why now, what's been the straw that broke the camel back, what's been the trigger that's put them into crisis. And again, you're only going to achieve that by listening. And as I said earlier on, it's about taking the time to understand and empathise with someone is, because if you start to do that, that's when you can start to build that relationship, build that trust. And that can't be done until you actually take the time to listen. And that can take 5 minutes or 5 hours. It really depends on the circumstances, how challenging or how bad a place the person finds themselves in. And that's why listening and patience is certainly kind of a key skill, key factor of crisis negotiation.
I want to come back to the skill, because that is one of the things that's of interest to, I think, to me, and I'm sure to my students as well, is the skills. Just before I do, though, I was going to run something past you. Quite a lot of the books on mediation, sorry, I'm a mediator, I always use that, make that mistake. Quite a lot of the books on negotiation, they have a real stress on winning. There's a kind of emphasis on winning. If you just looked at the covers of negotiation books, you might think, well, it's about winning. What's your take on that? Because the kind of negotiations you're talking about, winning doesn't sound quite the right word.
Yeah, it's about, again, I would almost put a rhetorical question back at you, is that define winning. Is it winning in the context of it's competitive? Is it me against you? Does there need to be one victor and one loser? Which I understand or potential in some business negotiation that's where looked at, but certainly in crisis negotiation, I look more on is that what are you looking to achieve? What are you looking to get? What is the outcome? For somebody who finds himself on a rooftop or in a barricaded siege, how are they going to get out of this? Because ultimately, as a crisis negotiator, I've nothing to sell or pitch to someone. You ultimately look to get them from put the knife down, put the gun down, come away from the ledge, and put them and freely walk into the back of a police vehicle, knowing full well that they're going to jail. But that's how you need to understand back to listening. What's the wants, the values, needs, and beliefs? And there's a couple of good kind of context in that. In that, if you take hostage negotiation, which are few and far between, but they do happen, is that hostage negotiators, hostage takers, I should say, in my experience, will release hostages when they believe or they feel they've got the best deal, not necessarily that they've actually achieved the best deal. There's a subtle difference there. It's just when they actually feel that they've got what they want. Right. And again, people in crisis, as I mentioned several times now, they probably, or I can say with somebody of confidence, they won't think they're in a negotiation. It won't be the fact is this negotiation, I'm going to achieve what I can. If they feel that they're trapped in a corner or they can see no way out, how do you negotiate with this people? And it just comes back to the point I made earlier on. It's just about listening and using active listening skills to find out what's important, what's their values, what's their wants, what's their needs, what's their beliefs, what's their core concerns. Because if you do that, that's back to the point I've made a few times now, is that you can start to build trust. If you start to build trust, you can get to influence and then hopefully come to a conclusion or a resolution that suits both sides.
It's almost as if you're saying that not losing is more important than winning. The potential for both sides to lose quite big time if it goes wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it's about, and I think you mentioned it earlier on, Charlie, sometimes it's just about finding out what's really important to that person. For some people who are in crisis and find themselves in a barricaded siege, it's maybe just that they don't want to lose face, they don't want to see their neighbours or friends or be on Facebook, them getting marched out of a house with a police officer. So for them to keep their reputation or their status is what's important to them. And so that's very much, it's not about losing, but that's how is that you can not take any two instances the same. You have to just spend the time. It's almost that journey of discovery. A negotiation is about gathering that information, because you need that information and intelligence to find out about that other person, because only walking their shoes and empathising can you actually find out what's important to them. And again, that takes time, but once you've achieved that, that's when you can start to build the trust and come to it. I don't know if saying a deal that works for both of you is maybe a bit glib, but relative, that's what it is. Because finding out what they want to achieve, unless you actually ask that. And there's some instances, we will do work before, we've done work before with like protest groups, demonstrators, and sometimes you just ask that question, what does success look like to you? So unless you're dealing with the elephant in the room, you could just go around circles.
There's quite a famous negotiation scholar called Howard Rafa, one of the founders of the Harvard project, and he talks about the negotiation dance. And in a sense, I mean, it's a sort of odd metaphor, but in a way, you can think of it maybe as rather a slow dance. But if it doesn't work for both sides, it doesn't work. I think that's what you put your finger on.
Yes, it's very much. I mean, we will preach and teach. I mentioned about the importance of listening and patience, but another key factor is that affiliation. It's about you want to get away from that me against you, that winning thing, that competitive thing. It's about you and I in this together, whatever way that looks at, you're in this together. And to be sincere and build that trust takes time. And it's using appropriate language to start to let the other person see that you're actually there to help them and want to work with them, and you're not there just as another police officer or someone that just wants to lock them up. And that can only be done by, again, I just keep saying that, listening and empathising.
Now, a couple more things then, Colin. One is you used the term active listening, and I'm sure others may have heard that term, but can you just explain that a wee bit more for us? What do you mean by that specifically?
Yeah, it goes back to, again, I could talk for hours on this, but I'm going to intentionally keep it brief. But it goes back to, it was initially introduced by the police in New York, and then there was more academia brought involved with the FBI in the 70s. And it's just a number of skills or tools that are used to go on that journey of discovery to find out about a person. There's about 8 or 9, depending on your what book you read or what skill set you have, ranging from minimal encouragers to probably one of my favourites is emotional labelling. And it's just ways of engaging with someone else and just letting them know that you see them and you hear them and you can empathise with them.
What's a minimal encourager?
Well, an obvious one is like the nodding of head when someone's speaking, or minimal language, things, something simple as that. There's a lot more to it, but it's just one thing that you can use. For example, particularly on Zoom calls, it's probably important the other person knows that you're listening, you understand. I mean, there, for example, your eyebrows are up and there's a nod of the head. So I can work out that you see where I'm coming from. So it's little things like that, and certain use of language. And there's other things like, and I mentioned right at the start about when I was an interviewer as a detective, little things like smiling. It can be a positive thing. It shows maybe you're not being a threat. You're maybe in a positive frame of mind. And if you look at some of the psychology, it releases positive chemicals in the body, and positivity can help you reach better outcomes. There's lots of little subtleties with it that, if used correctly, can be very powerful.
Okay, that makes sense. I think just finally, Colin, one of the, I suppose, the more critical voice in my head is saying to me, there must be times when you are dealing with manipulative, clever, not very nice people, and I know it's not your job to reach that judgment, but I wonder if what you think about that idea of, is there a risk of somebody effectively making you their ally in bad work, so to speak? You know, somebody that you're my man now, Colin. You're going to help me get what I want. How do you work with that?
No matter the kind of crisis incident that you would go to or attend, as varied they may be, the one common denominator is people. That's the one thing that doesn't change. And the reality is that I mentioned earlier on, and it's something that's kind of, I see as being crucial to understanding or developing a negotiation, is about values, wants, needs, and beliefs. So to understand a person what's important to them. Now, if I heard you correctly there, Charlie, if we're talking about someone who is potentially a bit of a narcissist and they are looking for you to take their side, that's probably where the difference between empathy and sympathy. You can empathise with someone, and it's something that when I was doing the training with the police that you would focus on, because on a lot of occasions, you're right, you would be engaging with some really nasty people who may have done some horrible things. And it's not for you there to condone it or support it, but by empathising where they are, at least lets them know you understand how they feel. And there's various tactics, and I wouldn't use the word tricks, tactics and skills that we can use to empathise with people who have been particularly narcissistic or controlling. So the fact is that you can still negotiate on a level playing field with them and not either being seen as subservient or alternatively not be seen as being siding with them. A side of that is that you get asked on occasion about, can you negotiate with a negotiator? Because if someone knows, and you may have the same with mediators, people say, well, this individual may know all the skills, they may know all the tactics that you're going to use.
Yeah.
But I take it back from the point, you're engaging with people, and if you can empathise and show that you empathise with someone, you will still be able to influence them. The only place I suggest it doesn't work is in the home, because if when you try it on your respective partners, I find, or whatever the case, it doesn't work, because when you probably similar to mediation, if you're negotiating, there's a particular issue or a problem, but you tend to find when you're in a relationship, you're the problem. There's not a third, so that tends to be the kind of challenge when you come on board dealing with that.
I think
I don't know if that answers your question at all.
Yes, it does, and I think what I'm taking from it, Colin, is that at some level you're also, as a police negotiator, you'll have a number of bottom lines. You'll have an identity that you can't leave, if you like. You are there on behalf of the law. You're there on behalf of the system. So I think for all negotiators, that's quite an interesting realization as well, that you can empathise without betraying the identity that you have. And I think in the course we'd like to come back to that, which is a really interesting challenge. Well, look, thanks, Colin. I think that's probably as much as we've got time for. I really appreciate you taking the time. Looking forward to your contribution to the course and the students. And thanks for taking the time.
You're welcome. See you soon.